I wasn't invited to my own daughter's PhD graduation. The very degree I worked my hands raw and my body tired to help her achieve. Instead of an invitation, I opened my email and found her words mocking me, telling me I could watch it through Google Earth with a laugh at the end. And in that moment, sitting alone at my kitchen table, I felt the kind of cold that doesn't come from winter, but from the heart you thought you could trust turning its back on you. Thank you for watching and for giving me a little of your time. It means more than you know, and I would love to hear from you. So please, tell me in the comments where you are watching from. Because knowing that my story reaches someone out there, no matter how near or far, gives me a little comfort in moments like these when life feels heavier than I can carry. You see, when I opened that email and read those words from my own daughter, my heart sank so deep, I thought I would never find the strength to lift it again. Yet, here I am, sharing it with you. Because sometimes the only way to keep going is to let the truth be spoken out loud. And maybe, just maybe, you will understand the weight of silence that followed in that moment. I am an old woman now. My hands have known the heat of kitchen stoves and the ache of scrubbing floors long after midnight. My back bent under the weight of overtime shifts, and my feet carrying me through years of quiet sacrifice. And through all those years, I had one thought that kept me steady. That one day my daughter would walk across a stage and wear that cap and gown I could never afford. And in that moment, every blister, every skipped meal, every time I wore the same pair of worn shoes would feel worth it. I raised her alone. After her father left, it was just the two of us. And I told myself that no matter what I lost, she would never lose her chance at a better life. So I worked harder than I thought a person could. I skipped the dentist when my tooth ached. I put off buying new glasses when the world blurred. I saved every penny in envelopes marked with her name. And I believed she would see me not just as her mother, but as her anchor. The one who poured herself out so she could stand taller. I remember the nights she stayed up late with her books spread wide across the table. I would bring her tea and whisper encouragement. And though my own eyes were heavy with exhaustion, my heart felt light because I thought I was watching a dream grow into reality. Yet all along, I never imagined that the very dream I helped build would become the wall that shut me out. Looking back now, I see the signs were there. The way her calls grew shorter, her tone sharper, her visits fewer and farther apart. But I brushed them aside because I thought ambition could make anyone distant for a time. I thought when the day finally came she would look for me in the crowd and smile, knowing I had walked every unseen step with her. Never did I expect that my name would be erased from that day entirely, left to sit alone with an email that laughed at my love as if it were nothing but a joke. The day everything started to unravel is still clear in my mind, because it was not just about an email or an invitation. It was about the moment when years of sacrifice, trust, and hope collided with a wall of cold rejection. I remember waking up that morning feeling a small burst of pride, because I knew my daughter's big day was close, and I thought surely the details of when and where would reach me soon. Surely she had saved the best moment for last. The moment of calling me and saying, "Mom, you've been there every step of the way. Please come sit in the front row." But instead of hearing her voice, I sat down at my old kitchen table with a cup of tea, opened my laptop, and saw her name glowing on the screen. My heart leapt as I clicked the message. But as my eyes traced the words, the excitement turned to ash inside me. It said they were keeping it small, that I could probably see it from Google Earth. And at the end, she had written those 3 letters, laughing at me as if my presence was not just unnecessary, but laughable. And in that instant, the room around me felt strange and unfamiliar, as though I had slipped into a world where my sacrifices had no meaning at all. I sat there for a long time, the clock ticking on the wall, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence, my hand trembling so hard that the tea rippled in its cup, and I kept reading the words again and again, hoping I had misread them, hoping that maybe the screen had glitched or my tired eyes had failed me. But it was there, clear and sharp, her way of cutting me out without hesitation. And as I sat in that chair, I thought about the shoes I never bought, so she could have new ones for school. The vacations I never took because there was always tuition due. The times I sat quietly in the doctor's office turning down treatments because I wanted to save every dollar I could, and it hit me that every one of those sacrifices had built the path she now walked so proudly. And yet she had chosen to close the door to me at the very end of it. My chest felt heavy, my throat tight, and I whispered to myself, how could she? Not in anger at first, but in disbelief, because I simply could not believe that the same child I had carried in my arms, the same one I held close on stormy nights, the same girl I believed would never turn her back on me, could write words that pushed me so far out of her world. And I thought maybe it was a mistake, maybe stress had gotten to her. Maybe someone had convinced her to keep the celebration small. But then I looked at the way she had written it, the lightness in her words, the mocking tone, and I realized this was no accident. It was intentional. It was her way of telling me that I had no place in her new life. And as that truth settled in, another feeling rose inside me. Not loud, not fiery, but steady and unshakable. A deep sense that I would not beg for the seat that should have been mine. I would not grovel for scraps of recognition when I had given her the very foundation she stood on. And so I closed the laptop slowly, my fingers lingering on the lid, and I sat back in my chair staring out the window at the empty street, the world going on as if nothing had changed. Yet for me, everything had, because I understood in that moment that silence might be the only response strong enough, and that one simple choice would carry more weight than any words I could ever throw back at her. Still, I cannot pretend it didn't hurt. The pain dug deep, deeper than any wound I had ever felt before. Because it wasn't just about being excluded from a ceremony, it was about being told in the cruelest way possible that all I had done, all the love, all the sacrifices, were no longer worthy of acknowledgement. And as I sat there, the tears welled in my eyes, but I wiped them away quickly, because I decided then and there that if she could erase me so easily, I would not give her the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. I would carry that pain in silence, but I would also begin to think carefully about what that silence could mean, not just for me, but for her too. As I sat in that chair staring at the closed laptop, the weight of her words pressing against my chest like a stone, memories began to rise uninvited. Memories that carried both sweetness and sorrow. I thought about the first day she told me she wanted to pursue a doctorate, her eyes shining with determination, her voice filled with a kind of confidence that made me proud, and I had promised her that no matter what, I would help her reach that dream, even if it meant giving up every comfort I had left in my own life. I thought about the mornings when I would leave before the sun came up, walking to work with my lunch wrapped in old paper, whispering prayers that my body would carry me through another day, and how every dollar I earned I carefully set aside, writing her name on envelopes so I would never forget what it was for, because her future was always more important than my present. I thought about how I smiled when I saw her books piled high on the table, how I would bring her food quietly, proud of how far she had come, never once imagining that the very education I had worked myself thin to support would one day become the weapon she used to cut me out of her life. The betrayal sat heavy in my stomach, twisting like a knife, because it was not just about an invitation withheld. It was about everything that led up to that point. Every choice I made in her favor now seemed to echo back at me with cruelty. Every hour of labor that left me sore and tired now seemed wasted, because instead of gratitude I had been given mockery. Instead of love I had been handed laughter at my expense. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became that this was not a simple oversight. This was a choice she made, deliberate and cold, to let me know that in her world, in her moment of triumph, there was no seat for me, and that realization cut deeper than any wound. I remember whispering to myself that night, not a prayer this time, but a truth I had to face, that love does not always return the way you gave it, that sometimes it comes back broken, or not at all. My hands tightened on the edge of the table as I told myself that I could not let this betrayal destroy me, because if I gave in to the pain, then everything I had endured, everything I had sacrificed, would mean nothing. And so I sat in that silence, tears drying on my cheeks, and I made a decision. Not out of anger, but out of a quiet kind of strength. That if she thought I had no place in her world, then I would step back and leave her to see what that world looked like without me holding it steady. It was in that moment of clarity that I felt something shift inside me, a realization that though she had shut me out, I still held the threads of her life in my hands. The support she stood on was still tied to me, and with that understanding came a strange kind of calm, because I knew I would not shout or scream or write back with rage. No, I would let my silence and my choices speak for me. And when the time came, she would feel the weight of what it meant to erase me. The night grew long as I sat with my thoughts, and though the sting of her words still burned inside me, I began to see things differently. Because while she believed she had the power to cut me out, she had forgotten how many threads of her life were still tied to my hands. Threads I had woven with sacrifice and patience. Threads that held up the very roof over her head, the car she drove, the plans she thought were her own. And as I thought about it, I realized that I had been carrying her on my shoulders far longer than she even knew. Her apartment lease had my name written beside hers. Her car loan had been approved because of my credit. Her phone still rang because I paid the bill each month. And though she had grown into someone who thought she no longer needed me, the truth was that the ground beneath her feet was still supported by the foundations I built. And when I remembered this, the pain in my chest softened into something steadier, a kind of quiet strength I had almost forgotten I had. I leaned back in my chair, the clock still ticking in the silence, and I thought about all the years I had begged life for enough strength to push through just one more day. All the nights when I thought I had nothing left, but somehow kept going. And it struck me that this moment was no different, that even though her words cut me deeper than any wound, I still had the choice of how I would respond, and I decided right then that I would not waste another tear. I would not chase after someone who could laugh at me so easily. I would instead remind her, not with anger or shouting, but with silence and action, that the bridge she had burned was the very one she still needed to cross. As that thought settled over me, a calm washed through the room, because for the first time in years, I felt the weight shifting from my shoulders. I was no longer the desperate mother fighting to be seen. I was a woman who had given more than enough, who had poured herself out until there was nothing left, and who finally realized that love cannot survive without respect. I whispered to myself that I would answer her cruelty, not with begging, but with dignity, and that when the time came, she would hear the echo of her choices in the silence I left behind. The more I sat with that calm, the more it grew into resolve, because I understood that my reply did not need to be a storm of words. It needed to be something she would feel in the life she lived every day. So I opened my laptop once more, not to write her back, but to look over every account, every payment, every obligation that still carried my name. And as I went through them, one by one, I felt the years of sacrifice replay in my mind, but this time instead of pain they gave me strength. Because I realized how much power I still held. The apartment lease that gave her a safe place to live had my signature tied to it. The car she drove so proudly each morning was financed under my credit. The phone she held in her hand every hour of the day rang because I quietly paid the bill. And with each discovery, the weight in my chest lightened, because I knew that if she wanted to erase me, then I could teach her what life without me truly looked like. So with steady hands I began to act, clicking through the accounts one after another, canceling the payments, ending the support, quietly closing the doors she had walked through without ever realizing I was the one holding them open. And though my heart trembled, I did not stop, because I reminded myself that I was not doing this out of spite, but out of dignity. Because no one, not even your own blood, should laugh at the hands that built the foundation of their life, and expect those hands to keep carrying the weight forever. As the last confirmation screen appeared before me, I whispered softly, almost to myself, that this was the moment I took back the years I had given away without question. And I closed the laptop with a kind of finality that filled the room with silence. A silence that no longer felt heavy with grief, but steady with strength. I sat back in my chair and looked around at the quiet house, The same house that had sheltered us through storms and winters. The same house where I had counted coins on the table just to make her dreams possible. And for the first time, I allowed myself to imagine a different future. One where I was no longer chained to her choices. One where I could finally breathe without the weight of carrying someone who no longer wanted me near. And in that moment, I promised myself that the next steps I took would not be for her, but for me. And that was a promise I intended to keep. That night, I lay awake in my bed, not tossing and turning with sorrow as I once might have, but lying still with thoughts rolling through me like waves. And instead of asking why she had done this to me, I asked myself what it would mean to finally live for myself after all these years of giving, until there was nothing left. And the answer came slowly, quietly, like a light creeping in under a closed door. It meant I no longer had to sit waiting for scraps of kindness. I no longer had to measure my worth by her recognition. I could finally step into the life I had denied myself for so long. When the sun rose, I brewed my coffee and walked through the small living room, letting my eyes linger on the stacks of old bills and the neat folders where I had kept every receipt and statement tied to her education. And as I picked them up, a strange peace came over me, because I knew I had honored my promise to her. I had carried her across the finish line. But now the race was over, and my part was done. I spent that morning making calls, one by one, tying up loose ends and closing chapters that had weighed me down for years. And with each call I felt lighter, as though the chains that had bound me to her choices were falling away link by link, until finally I could breathe again without the ache in my chest. And I realized that for the first time in decades, my days could be my own. When I finished, I sat by the window with my cup of coffee gone cold, and I thought about all the places I had dreamed of but never seen. The journeys I put aside because there was always another tuition bill, another expense, another sacrifice to make. And I asked myself what it would feel like to finally go, to finally see the world with my own eyes before my time here was done. The answer came quicker than I expected, and without hesitation I reached for the envelope I had kept hidden away. The one that held the savings I had planned to gift her after the graduation. A final gesture to set her up in her new life. And as I opened it, I felt no regret, only clarity, because I realized that money had been earned with my sweat and tears. And if she believed I was not worthy of being by her side in her proudest moment, then I was more than worthy of using it to reclaim my own. I looked at the numbers written on those papers, and instead of imagining her future, I imagined mine. A future not bound by silence and exclusion, but filled with the sound of my own laughter in places I had only ever seen in pictures. And in that moment the decision was made. Not with bitterness, but with the kind of calm that comes when you know you are finally free. The very next day I carried that envelope with me as I walked into the travel office in town. My heart steady but my hands trembling a little because it had been so many years since I had done something entirely for myself. And when I told the woman behind the desk that I wanted a ticket to Paris, she looked at me with surprise, as though she expected someone like me to ask for something smaller, something safer. But I simply smiled and said I had waited long enough, and as she clicked away on her keyboard, I felt something inside me shift. The kind of shift that happens when you take back a piece of yourself you thought was gone forever. I thought about how many times I had promised myself that one day I would see more of the world than just the walls of my kitchen and the path to work. And how many times I had broken that promise because there was always another demand, another reason to give everything to someone else. But as I held the ticket in my hand, the weight of it felt like proof that my life was not over, that even in these later years, I could still claim joy that belonged only to me. That evening, I packed a small suitcase, folding clothes with care, not because they were new or fancy, but because they were mine. And for once they were going somewhere chosen by me, not dictated by need or sacrifice. And as I zipped it closed, I paused to look around the house that had seen every struggle and every moment of endurance. And instead of sadness, I felt gratitude. Gratitude that these walls had sheltered me through storms, that this roof had heard my whispered prayers, but I also felt ready to step beyond it, ready to carry myself into a world where my worth did not need proving. A world where I could sit in a quiet cafe or stand on a crowded street and simply be a woman who had survived. When morning came, I left for the airport with the first light, the streets still quiet, the air crisp with possibility. And as I walked through the terminal with my suitcase rolling behind me, I felt a calm I had not known in years, as if each step was peeling away the layers of disappointment and pain, leaving only the truth that I had given enough. And now it was my time to live. I sat by the window as the plane lifted from the ground, watching the city grow smaller beneath me. And I whispered softly to myself that freedom fit me better than any cap and gown ever could. Because I was not dressed in borrowed pride or recognition withheld. I was clothed in my own strength, in the quiet dignity of a woman who finally chose herself. As the plane carried me across the ocean, I leaned my head against the window and let my thoughts wander, not to the pain of the email or the ache of being excluded, but to the strange peace that was beginning to grow inside me. And I realized that sometimes distance is the only medicine for wounds that cut too deep. Because when you stand too close to betrayal, you cannot see beyond the hurt. But when you rise above it, you begin to see the smallness of those who thought they could break you. I imagined her walking into her big ceremony, surrounded by people clapping and cheering, her name being called, her cap tossed into the air, and I imagined her glancing at the crowd only to find no trace of me there. Not the smile she once searched for as a little girl, not the steady hands that had held her up all those years. And for the first time, I did not feel sorrow at being absent. I felt power, because my silence would echo in her ears far louder than my presence ever could. When the plane landed and I stepped onto the streets of Paris, I breathed in air that was new to me. Air that tasted of freedom and possibility. And I walked with the steady steps of someone who had chosen herself after a lifetime of choosing others. I wandered through narrow streets, past old stone buildings and warm bakeries, hearing the hum of voices in a language I did not understand. And instead of feeling lost, I felt found, because for the first time I was not defined by what I had given up, but by what I was claiming for myself. I sat in a small cafe, the kind I had only ever seen in pictures, sipping coffee and watching strangers pass, and I smiled to myself, thinking of how my daughter might be looking at her phone, dialing my number again and again, expecting me to answer, but finding only silence. The same silence she had handed me in the cruelest form when she told me to watch her life from a distance. That silence, now turned back toward her, became my lesson and my shield. And as I sat in that cafe, the city alive around me, I whispered to myself that this was not revenge, it was release. Because I no longer carried the burden of needing her to see me. I saw myself clearly now, and it was enough. The calls began the very next morning, my phone buzzing again and again on the nightstand of the little hotel room I had checked into. And at first I let it ring without moving, because I already knew who it was. I already knew the sound of desperation that would be waiting for me on the other end. And I was not ready to give her what she wanted. Not ready to rescue her from the very silence she had chosen to give me. As the hours passed, the messages started to pile up. Her voice growing sharper and more frantic with each one. At first light and casual as if nothing had happened, then slowly breaking into panic as she realized things around her were unraveling. The car payment that did not go through, the landlord who suddenly called about rent, the phone bill she thought was hers but was never really hers. And with each word I heard when I finally listened, I felt no triumph. Only a heavy truth settling deeper inside me. The truth that she had built her pride on a foundation she never cared to acknowledge, a foundation I had held together with my own two hands. I sat in that room with the window open to the sound of Paris streets below, her words spilling from the little device in my hand, and I thought back to that email she sent, the way she laughed as she told me to watch her life from a distance, and I wondered if she understood now that distance cuts both ways, that absence can wound the one who imposes it, just as much as the one who suffers it. Because in her proudest moment, she had chosen to erase me. But in the days that followed, she discovered that my absence was not something she could survive so easily. I closed my eyes as I listened to her pleading, her voice no longer mocking but cracked and uneven. and I realized that life has its own way of teaching lessons, not always with anger or fire, but with silence and the sudden awareness of what has been lost. And as much as it hurt me to know she was struggling, I also knew this was not my burden to carry anymore, because I had given her enough, more than enough, and I could not step back into the shadows to hold her up again just because she finally noticed the ground crumbling beneath her. So I placed the phone down gently, letting it buzz without answer, and I turned my gaze back to the streets outside. The laughter of strangers drifting up to me, the smell of bread from a bakery filling the air, and in that moment I knew I was exactly where I was meant to be. Not behind her as the silent sacrifice, but ahead of her at last, walking into a life that belonged only to me. As the day unfolded and her calls continued, I felt something inside me shift, not the sharp sting of betrayal anymore, but a deep and steady calm, because I finally understood that I did not need to answer every ring. I did not need to rush to prove my worth to someone who had chosen to mock me. And that realization felt like the first breath of freedom after years of holding it in. I walked through the city streets with my phone tucked away in my bag, hearing it vibrate again and again, but each time I chose not to reach for it. I chose instead to listen to the sound of church bells echoing in the distance, to the laughter of children chasing each other in a square, to the rush of the river moving steady and sure beneath the bridges. And with each step, I felt lighter, as if all the years of sacrifice that had weighed me down were finally lifting from my shoulders. I thought about how easy it would have been to give in, to pick up the call, to let her voice drag me back into the old role of silent supporter, the one who fixes every mistake without recognition. And for a moment the habit tugged at me, the old instinct to protect. But then I remembered that email, those careless words that told me to watch her life from a distance. And I reminded myself that this silence was not revenge. It was the only way to protect what was left of me. The more I walked, the more I realized that my absence was teaching her a lesson my words never could. Because sometimes it is not until the steady presence is gone that you realize how much it truly held. And as painful as it was, I knew that lesson was one she needed. Not because I wanted her to hurt, but because she needed to understand that love without respect cannot last forever. That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of gold, I sat on a bench overlooking the river, the city lights beginning to shimmer, and I whispered to myself that I had finally chosen me, not out of selfishness but out of survival, because a heart can only be broken so many times before it learns that silence is its only shield. I closed my eyes, the phone still buzzing faintly in my bag, and I let the sounds of the city carry me into peace. A peace I had not known in years. A peace that reminded me that my worth was never in the invitation she withheld. It was in the life I had built, the strength I still carried, and the freedom I had finally claimed. As night settled in and the streets grew quiet, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. From the years of sacrifice that built her future, to the cold moment when she cut me out, and then to this silence that had become my answer. And I realized that what once felt like the deepest wound had become the doorway to my own freedom. Because while she had laughed at me and told me to watch her life from afar, she never imagined that I would choose to live mine fully, without waiting for her permission or her recognition. Sitting there by the river, I understood that sometimes the greatest strength is not in shouting or demanding, but in stepping away, in choosing peace over pain. And though her calls may continue and her regret may grow, I will carry on with dignity because I finally know my worth, and I will not let anyone erase it again. Thank you, my dears, for staying with me until the end of my story. If it touched your heart, please subscribe, leave a comment, and share your own truth. I would love to hear from you.